So, I am here with the wonderful Danni Petkovic and Jill Nash, who are in New South Wales near Sydney this morning. It's so nice to have you both here, and thank you for agreeing to have a chat about the amazing work that you do and your ideas and visions around how we can change death and dying in Australian culture for the better so that it can be a better experience both for people at the end of their life but also for those of us who remain as well and who are, kind of going through that process with a dying person and then obviously staying on after they're gone. There are so many questions that I want to ask you both. This is a space that fascinates me no end, and that I just think there are so many incredibly rich conversations to be had that aren't being had really as often as they could be. And I know that's something that you both kind of see and feel as well. But maybe just to start, I'd love to hear from both of you about the work that you do in this space and what that looks like, and also what led you into it.
You go. So for me, so Jill and I partner to run death literacy workshops and seminars where we talk about aging well and dying well and how getting prepared for later life, which includes death and dying and is actually the main focus of our talks, actually helps you live with more gratitude. And it's actually freeing and life affirming to actually have all of your paperwork and all of the discussions you need to have about your death and your end of life. So that's what we do together. And I'm a death and mortality doula. So I also support people going through from preparation to death and after death care. And I help their families navigate systems and navigate that, really fundamentally human experience that has been over medicalized and sanitized and outsourced. And we know that it's a remembering for so many people to just sit with their dying and tend to the dead and care for the dead. And it's not something that we should be considering as morbid or taboo or anything like that. It's something that actually gives us more gratitude for life. And so I got here because I'd been in the other camp where I was avoiding it at all costs. And then I cared for my brother who died almost 4 years ago. And in that experience, we had people come in and ask the real questions and ask, where do you want to die? And what do you want to happen to your body after you die? And I think when you don't have those conversations and people don't know, in your grief, you have to make up what happens next and what would they have wanted. And I've had those experiences too, where it's not as easy and it's not as nice and it's not as loving. It's an act of love to do this paperwork and the conversations.
I was going to say, I think there's, apart from gratitude, I think there's so much anxiety and stress, and the more prepared you are and the more you know about it, it's the fear of the unknown. I mean, none of us knows what it's like. We have one friend actually who actually has died and come back, and it's really interesting to hear him talk about that. Anyway, most of us don't have that experience. So I think that's super important. As it happens, the timing is extraordinary. Tomorrow, May the 2nd, is an anniversary of two deaths in my family, my father and my husband. Ironically, but not in the same year, but on the same date. So it's a very significant date for us. And that's important too, the acknowledgement of it and lessons learned, which I think is why we're here today. There's lots we could do better. As I said to you before we started recording, my family does death very badly. At least I want to make mine better for other people as much as for me.
So curious about what that means and what that looks like for you, Jill, because I think we do hear about this idea of good deaths and bad deaths, and of course there there are so many different ways that things can play out, and it looks so different, you know, from person to person and circumstance to circumstance. But if you're willing, I'd love to hear about those lessons that you learned from your father and your husband, and what didn't work in those situations that you've taken forward and are now bringing into this work.
It always amazes me, Anna, that given how many deaths, premature deaths in my family, I had a baby who died at 18 months. My husband, as I say, was 46. My parents were 60 and 62. I married again. He was killed at 56. And yet I had never seen a dead body until I was in my 70s. And it was the wife of a friend of mine. Oh, she was my friend too, but basically we were walking buddies. It wasn't until I saw Connie dead and how peaceful she looked, how tranquil, you know, and I thought, this is bizarre. I've had so many deaths, and this is the first opportunity, and it was such a privilege to do that. It was a big milestone. I don't know if that's answered your question, but it does explain something of what I've learned, of why it's so important to know more about it.
On a personal level, what you're saying resonates, because when I was 13, my granddad died suddenly in a car accident, and that was my first experience of death. We were very close, and we were given the opportunity to see the body. And my parents, put that offer to each of us, me and my siblings. My younger siblings chose not to, but I did. And to this day, I am so grateful that I did have that opportunity and that I was able to do that, because otherwise it would have felt forever like he just disappeared into nowhere. And I think, being able to at least have that experience of going, okay, here's your body, the spirit of you, who knows, but here's your body, and it's okay. I was terrified, of course, because it had been a car crash. I thought, oh my gosh, is he going to be? Will I recognise him? Will he be mangled? What will I find? And he just looked peaceful. And here I go getting emotional all these years later. But I guess what I hear and what you're saying is that there is a difference there when we can, rather than kind of death being whisked away from us and sort of hidden and glossed over and removed, when you can actually be sort of really present in that process, and afterwards there's a different kind of experience and grief and healing that's able to kind of transpire. And I wonder if that resonates or what that sparks for you both.
I'm really interested that your parents offered you all the opportunity, because in my case we were never offered the opportunity. When my mother died, we were in England. She died in England. We were all over there to sort of more or less say goodbye. She never admitted she was going to die. She never admitted she had cancer. My father had already died. And my husband wouldn't even let them come to the funeral, the children. And I was just dealing with what I had to deal with, the logistics in some ways, as well as my own grief for my mother. But I mean, that's why I say we do it all wrong. My family does it so badly. We've always got it wrong, but now we're going to get it right.
Well, I think everything Jill's done to prepare us. Yeah, because her act of love to her family is this wonderful folder.
And also trying to have conversations. I mean, of all the things that I think you can do, yes, you can prepare all of this documentation so that everybody knows. And in a way, that's a conversation, but it's not a face-to-face conversation. And even in doing things like an advanced care plan, and you do that way ahead of time. Nobody's terminal at that stage. It's just a good thing to do. And it took me half a day to sit. I wanted to do it with my 3 children. It took me half a day because they didn't agree. And I said, hang on, it's my wishes we're dealing with, get on board. And we did, and they signed it. And I thought that was really important. But that was when I was in Sawtell, so it was probably 15 years ago. But it is so important to have those conversations. And it's tricky because, it's a dynamic between parent and child, and and there's a whole lot of other things at stake there. Their relationships between each other. It's very tricky.
But it raises a beautiful point that you did it with them while you're still here, while you're still well. And what that alleviates the problem is for that arguing that happens on the deathbed or after death, it's gone because they know very clearly you had the conversation. The paperwork's only one part, Anna. It's the conversations, and it's letting people know that they are going to be nominated as, your person and what your wishes are. And, the reality is that it's an absolute act of love for the people that are left behind in grief. And grief, we know from all the research and all the, really clever academics doing beautiful work in this space, and from lived experience, and from, all the things, that grief changes when you can actually just be present with the dying. You can be present with the dead, and you can actually tend to your people yourself. And it's not outsourced, and it's not sanitized, and it's not told that you can't handle this, so we're going to take care of it for you. There's nothing to fix, there's nothing to take care of. There's a put on a cup of tea, a sit with the person, a sit with your feelings, and just take the time to actually be present. And it makes such a difference to what happens next for the bereaved, and it really changes relationships. We hear time and time again of people who have never spoken after a certain person in their life died, despite being very close before, because no one could agree. And so then in that process, things explode, and there's heightened emotions. We know grief shifts our executive functioning. So there's so much that can be said for having this preparation and then having the conversations. And we both know from doing it that it's freeing, it's life affirming. You live with gratitude because all that paperwork and all those conversations have been had. We continue to have them. You don't have to be passionately involved in spreading the message like we are, and doing this work day in, day out. But the people that we talk to, and the public talks that we give, and the seminars and the workshops, they want to keep talking.
Well, also as a ripple effect, in which we can't possibly quantify, but we might throw the pebble into the pond and start the conversations, but we have no idea how those ripples are going to spread outside. And people have said, oh, you said that, in that seminar I went to. Well, I've told my friend so-and-so, and I've had the conversation with my families. You don't know that. We'll never know that. All we can do is do it.
But we do know that no one leaves unhappy or unsatisfied, and no one wants to stop the conversation. And what we recognize is that there's not space for death at the table anymore. There's not that spaciousness to talk about these things that matter in a way. It's our only unifying certainty, commonality in this human experience. And it's the one thing that kind of gets shelved, and let's not talk about it. We have an 80-year-old lady that sat, or she's, I think, 85, at the front of one of our talks, and she put her hand out and she said, thank you, this is really, really important for me. I've been trying to get my kid to have a conversation with me about my death and my wishes, and what she doesn't want, which is equally as important and really strongly known naturally for a lot of people. And she said, she points to, a 60-something-year-old child beside her, and says, and they keep saying to me, you're not there yet, wait till we're there, blah, blah, blah. But we know when you're there, it's too late. Like, getting on with this now changes everything for everyone that we work with. The will is only one component. Like, the will is the financial and the legal if you have big ticket items that need to be taken into account. Like, what else is in your folder that?
Oh, well, I think to me, actually, more important that, yes, everybody has to have a will, otherwise you die intestate and it's a terrible mess. But in fact, a more important document is the Advance Care Directive, because you're still alive when that's being enacted. So they are your wishes when you're alive. The will is what happens after you've died. So whilst that is important, the Advance Care Directive is the one that New South Wales Health, the government, uses, I think is a very good one because it talks about your values. It doesn't just say, pull out the plugs, when I get terminal. It really tests your values and it makes you think about those values. And it is a vehicle for having the conversation. It's a platform for doing that. And so obviously, I think it does help. We need aids, and I think one of the things on my to-do list to discuss with Danni is what things like puzzles and cards and things we can use to trigger the conversations when we're not going through the process of an advanced care directive. That's one way. But I think we need to identify or create the triggers that will lubricate this conversation. And it's tricky. We know it's tricky. It's why teenagers don't talk to their parents across the room, but they'll have a conversation when they're driving
side by
side with no face, eye contact. I mean, it's all sensitive, and we need to respect that sensitivity and find ways of dealing with it.
It's a precious conversation. It really is.
It is. And I guess I'm thinking about, this reticence that people have to having that conversation. I'm curious, in your experience, where that reticence is stronger. Is it in the people who are getting closer to the end of their life themselves, or is it in their children and those who don't want to talk about it, or is it a real mix?
I think it's a mix, personally.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a number of friends who are in their 90s, and yes, that they talk about getting old. They talk about all of the aches and pains and things they can't do and so on. But still, I haven't been able to have a conversation about what plans have you got in place for your funeral, and have you had the conversation with your offspring? They just won't engage with me. Maybe I don't approach it too well. Maybe I'm too forceful and so passionate that I steamroller them or something. Maybe I've got to find a better way of opening the gate.
I think it's a commonality. There's so many people that are aging but still won't talk about it. And I don't think you're the problem. There's so many ways that they can have these conversations, and there's so many tools, and to your point, like the cards and the different mechanisms that we can open the conversation gently, lovingly, that actually leads to a really rich conversation.
I think there's another thing it's very too big for us probably, but the government, people, policymakers really don't get what this is all about. There's no, they can't embrace it. I don't know whether they're not prepared to do it because they too are people, parents, or have grandparents, or whatever it is. But I've looked up the My Aged Care Living in Residential Care website to find out whether they talked about well-being, whether there was any mention of, if you're in residential aged care, let's face it, the odds are that you're going to die within the next 5 years. But there's nothing in there to make those 5 years as precious and as dignified as you can. There's absolutely nothing that a residential aged care home has to do in order to get accredited in the emotional side, or even engaging the senses. There's nothing to say that a weekly hand massage, or someone to come and brush your hair, or how many times would you like to stroke a dog in a week, or something. I mean, all those things, that whole aspect of at the bureaucratic end is just ignored,
because death and dying is still not talked about. And I think Hannah is a good one, because it is a mix of whether it's people on their deathbed, but often, like, Jill's friends that she's talking about that can't have the conversation with her and won't have the conversation with her, and people on nearing death, which is a different scenario because they're still living, often with frailty and comorbidities, and medical technology means we live much longer. 100 years ago, I'm in my 50s, that was death. It wasn't even old age at 50. And what what happens is most of the time, in my experience, people who are dying want to talk about it. They want to talk about their legacy. They want to talk about what their life meant. They want to talk about all the things that are important to them, but they don't want to upset the people around them. So that spaciousness and the stuff that I do in the work, as a doula and an end of life support person, is often about allowing the space for those conversations and sometimes bringing the family together to have it together because they don't want to. For instance, a mum who says, I don't want to upset my kids. I'm prepared, I'm accepting, I'm at the stages that I need to be at, but my job has been to protect my kids. So how then can I have that conversation when I know it's going to upset them? So, we work out how to have that. So I think that dying people are more likely and more willing to have the conversation. But there's still a lot of work to be done to remind people that we know how to die. We've done it forever. It's a natural part of being human. What we have done is we've over medicalized death. There's a beautiful quote by Professor Alan Kelleher, who was part of the public movement and also part of the compassionate communities model, which is a beautiful model about recognizing who's in your community and how many people you need to help you die at home if that's your wish. There's a big disconnect between who dies at home and who wants to in Australia. It's 70 to 80% of people want to die at home, but only 14% are. Big disconnect. And mostly because we're not having the conversations. So when the time comes, if it's premature or if it's prolonged still, we outsource it. So, he talks about how death is not a medical event, it's a social event with a medical component sometimes, not the other way around.
Um, I was I was curious about actually that point you made about the social event and what it takes to die at home, and I think this is one of this is one of many black boxes that even exist for me around death and dying still, and things that I just don't know. I'm really curious, how many people do you need around you to die at home, and what do you need around you to die at home? What needs to be in place?
It's really interesting. I just spent a weekend with the Australian Home Funeral Association and the Natural Death Advocacy Network, running a workshop about natural death care and how we can care for our dying, and how we can go into community and show people that it's a remembering and that it's ancient knowledge that has just been lost and taken away. So the statistic they say is 16. So you need a team around you that covers all the things. And it may be someone that actually never is bedside, but they're making sure the meals are prepped. They're making sure the medication's collected from the pharmacy, or they're making sure that, you've had, to your point, a hand massage or a foot massage where you actually, are feeling like all the things that you value. The values part is such a big part. We know that people tend to die as they live, and it's very values based. So, what fabrics you want in your space and on your skin, what scents, what music, who can be in the room and who absolutely should never be in the room. That's equally as important. So there's so many components to that if we have the conversations, we know who's in our community. We know that when the time comes, you've got me, you've got it all worked out in your folder.
She's committed to that now, isn't she?
You've popped it all
Yes, it's
backed up on this little USB as well. All these things, like your sons know my details as well to support them, because Jill's very open about these conversations and what her wishes are, but it's still going to take a team when the time comes. So, having all the different things, having the checklist, you don't have a beloved pet here living with you, but, a lot of people do. They have a dog or a cat or a bird or a frog. And, who's going to take care of that? That doesn't formulate into part of a will. So, having those conversations and having that emotional side of your wishes known and your wishes documented is so important. Your passwords, we all have one of these. Who's got the password?
I think people are more conscious of that, but I do think the emotional legacy is something that isn't taken care of. It isn't acknowledged as being an important thing. And even just when you're going into a residential aged care and presumably not coming out again, what are the key things you want to have with you? Do you have a favourite knee rug? If you're going to take photos of your family, now I have been through this process with somebody because I felt it was so austere and unfriendly. And then the very dutiful son came and put family photos, took the family photos and put them behind his mother in bed. It's just being aware of all of those emotional and as Danni says, the sensory things.
We only get one chance to die in this human form, in this experience. And, it can be good, it can be beautiful. You both spoke about the peacefulness of,
The dead
someone
person.
after they've died. And that is such, a wonderful acknowledgement, because there is a lot of peace, but the acceptance comes from the preparedness, I think, and the conversations, and knowing that you're okay with this part. I don't like using that good death because it naturally means bad death. And we're not aiming for that. We're aiming for you to die well, according to your wishes. And, we talk about aging and dying well or dying better. So that means not outsourcing, that means not sanitizing, not over medicalizing, unless that's what they want. If that's what they want, then that's also possible. But we only know that through conversation and preparedness.
But we've assigned responsibility for so much of our lives anyway. I mean, we've signed so much to the government to make decisions on our
Mm,
behalf. And somehow we have to claw that back and say, look, hang on a bit. And I had a conversation with my son about this last night, talking about how we should reclaim the community grassroots roots part of society, it's a massive job, but because we have out so much to decision makers, governments, and so on. Um, but I think people like us can do it.
that's it. And we tell people you can actually have your person home in New South Wales for up to 5 days. There are mechanisms to, even if they didn't die at home, that's what they wanted. And what that does, as you know, is that allows that time to acknowledge and accept that person in this form has died. We can sit with that. We can be with that. We acknowledge that they're not whisked away, never to be seen, and then your brain is left wondering, am I going to run into them again? Because we're not attached to the process, and so seeing death and sitting with death and tending to the dead, there's this ritualistic washing and dressing and caring for our dead that has been outsourced, and we did it for ever, and it's just been the last 100 so years or 100 and a bit years that we outsourced it all. So there's a lot of work, to your point, that there's great people in community reclaiming. It's not about, you know
Yeah.
designing anything different. It's about reclaiming and remembering that we can do this. We can be with our dying, and we can sit with our dead, and we can care for them. And you can actually have a funeral yourself. You don't need to outsource that component. You can have the farewell how you want. There's more options for disposal of your body these days than there was before. There's water cremation. There's, lots of different ways that there's a natural burial and conservation site that just opened down in Bedella that, is a beautiful way that I've seen. I think they're up to their sixth burial now. And, you become part of the ecosystem, and you become part of the beautiful little forest that's growing there.
I think the trouble is, though, that you've got to be so proactive to find out what is available. I mean, you and I make it our business to find out, and we'd be aware of that. But the percentage of people who'd even know what their options are for being at home is very, very small. And in a way, that's my point, because the society around us is so regulated to operate in a certain way because it's efficient.
Yeah.
And efficiency isn't what this is about at all.
And the government's now offered $25,000 for support at home. That's the name of the package. So people can die at home. There's a lot of criteria around it. But in every talk we do, how many people know that that's available?
And even if it is, how to access it? You know, it's all very well to have your $25,000, but there's probably multiple steps that you have to take.
As we're talking, I find myself sort of, fluctuating between these feelings of like, actually this is so easy, and oh my god, this is so hard. When you talk about some of these granular, really just like human, natural kind of components of, what can be a beautiful dying experience, a foot massage, brushing someone's hair, making a meal, those sorts of things. It's like, oh yeah, of course we can do that. We know how to do that. And then, yes, there's the, how we've over bureaucratized elements of this that is where it starts to feel daunting again. But I kind of want to stay in that space of just, like how much is actually possible when you sort of try and set that aside. And I just think that conversations like this, I've learned so much about just some of these things that I might not have thought of, in the moment, but now they would be there in my mind as something to think of, and that's taken all of 5 minutes for you both to just throw a few of these things at me. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool. When someone's dying, like I can think of doing that. And I'm curious what you're seeing out there. Obviously, what you're doing through your seminars is really contributing to this and helping people with this. But what do you see out there at the moment that is also helping to kind of help people do that remembering, bring that simple knowledge back to people, and where there's possibility for more?
I think it's enormously helpful when celebrities come on board. When James Valentine died the other day, very publicly acknowledging how he did it with VAD, that would have boosted, and that's how we met on the launch of, at Parliament House, the day that legislation came into force. That was the day, it was a very significant day for Danni and me. But for James Valentine to make so public his own death will have boosted that hugely. And little people like me, don't have the same clout. We do our own bits.
I think you do.
In our little way. Well, we do try and get interviewed in the media. That makes a difference. But when you've got a big name like James Valentine, it just moves you forward so many paces.
I wonder if you can show us your golden oldie folder, Jill, and step us through a little bit.
Well, there's a section on legal things, obviously, all the documents and the copies of the documents. I also have prepared a checklist, which we do at seminars. Have you made your will? Where is it? Who knows where it is? But there's also things like financial matters, a list of advisors. I mean, a lot of people are in my life now, whether they be medical, financial, legal, social, and so on. So it's easy for someone to, I mean, it looks hefty. It's and daunting. It's because it's comprehensive, but you don't need to absorb all that information at the same time. I just want it to be there.
Anything financial, your births, deaths, marriage, citizenship. Her loved ones are not going to have to sort through her, filing cabinet or boxes in the wardrobe to find where all these beautiful documents, like there's some really old documents here. Look at these.
Well, there's my husband who would have been, 95. It's his birth certificate, yes.
1949. Look at this beautiful document. That's her marriage certificate,
And the other thing is
comprehensive.
It's comprehensive, but also like a lot of these things, you need to renew them. When I came back to Sydney, I changed my will because circumstances had changed within my family and who I wanted to bequeath money to. So anyway, those are the very practical things, but they also have a very emotional component because of the relationships involved.
I think there are a lot of people out there who are in the same position, and just, you know, hearing some of these nitty gritty details, it's just like, oh, okay, all right, that's what we're talking about, you know, and that's what this looks like, which I think is so valuable. But I guess the one thing that I did also want to explore briefly before we run out of time is just this question of when we engage with this stuff. And one of the things that we are working on through Good Flock is trying to shift sort of societally and culturally this idea that aging and dying is something that you only need to think about and engage with when you're at the end of your life or when you are an old person, and that actually engaging earlier from very young ages can be something that actually enriches your life throughout your life. And it feels to me as though part of what's at play here is that, you know, conversations about dying are far less loaded when you're sort of assuming that this is a conversation that's not going to be necessary for 40 years. You know, I've started to have the odd conversation with my parents about how they think about their getting older. But they're only just at 60 now, you know, so it's quite easy to sort of sit back and go, okay, well, yeah, let's talk about this, because it's not feeling loaded is the best word for it, I suppose, loaded right now. And I feel as though my own personal experience of being around death early in my life and having some significant people pass in my teens and my 20s has had a real impact on how I think about what matters in life and how I want to live. And I think that death was a gift in many ways in terms of how it's led me to live. And so I just wonder, yeah, if you have any reflections on those sorts of ideas, and what it can mean and what it can look like when people in their teens, their 20s, their 30s, you know, are having conversations around these topics.
For me, it's a lot easier to have them with my grandchildren than it is with my own children. So my grandchildren, 4 of them are in their 20s, one in his 30s, one in her 40s. They're the people I would find it easier to have the conversations with than their parents. However, I think we need to be having the conversations with the parents, not only in respect of us, my age, but in respect of themselves. For me, that's our next efforts have to go, is not in retirement villages, but amongst the baby boomers. Haven't quite worked out the strategy for doing that, but I think that's where we go next, is my view.
Because it is those people that are in their 60s that are like, we've got ages, you know. The statistics they have from superannuation funds is that people are living into their 90s. And so, like, yes, if you're privileged enough to age, which is not a given, then being prepared in your 40s and your 50s and even your 30s and your 20s, like, why not? If you have an asset, if you have a child, if you have a pet, if you have something you love that you want to hand to somebody else when you die, and you know inherently who that should be, it should be recorded and discussed. So that's just one component. That's about the transfer of things, you know, let's be real. It's just about the things around us. It's not about this thing. This thing is a whole other conversation. Like, most people know categorically what their limits are about things that you talked about with advanced care planning. You know, I don't want to be tube fed. I don't want to be connected to a machine. These are the things I absolutely don't want. But then when you go a little bit further and you start looking at the values, would that be acceptable for me to live in this way? And people often need a little bit more time to help them along with that. But it's such an important discussion. And that's not something for somebody in their 80s only or someone in their 70s only. It's absolutely not. It's for every single one of us as humans. Like, once you're 18 and you can make those decisions for yourself, you should have it documented and you should tell the people around you. I mean, it was traditionally burial or cremation. There were only 2 options. Now there's a lot more nuance to that, you know. Water cremation rather than flame cremation. You know, there's a natural burial as opposed to, you know, the big cemetery, or what you want to happen that's important to you is significant. And, you know, there's a big camp. Like, I categorically never want to be cremated. You know, I've spoken about that to death to my family. And, my daughter will say, Mum, we've heard it, we know. But it's important. And a lot of people will have something so significant that they want people to know, but keeping it to yourself is not beneficial to anyone.
I think the other thing that occurs to me, Anna, you said your grandfather's death was unexpected because it was in an accident. That death isn't always, it's not always going to be possible to have the preparation time that you'd like. Therefore, the sooner you get comfortable with even thinking about it, it's kind of easier. It's too confronting when you're 86 and you haven't thought about it. That's why people are in denial. But I mean, we all know that whether it's an accident or you have childhood cancer, I mean, there are circumstances which can happen any time that cause death. And I think, again, we haven't thought about that a lot.
And I think part of reclaiming this space is questioning what language we use, if any, around death and dying. And do we euphemize it? Because that's something that's happened too, to soften it. We say we lost them. We say they passed. We say, they're in a better place. Like, we have these platitudes that are really unhelpful for the grieving person because, they didn't have a good innings. Regardless, I supported my grandpa and lived with him until he was 94 and he died. And I couldn't stand those sort of platitudes that were said because he was a very significant loss in my life and he was my favorite human on the planet. And it was a big, big gap and hole in my heart when he died. And it's not through cruelty, it's that people don't know what to say because we've lost this language, which is why I invite people to question the language they use.
In my golden oldie folder, at the big introduction to my family, at the beginning, I talk about how much I love them and I'm so proud of them, etc., etc. And I've also said, please do not say anything other than that I have died. No euphemisms, thank you. Yeah, I feel passionately about that because I think that's the problem. We're just perpetuating the problem.
We sanitize it, then we disconnect from reality.
Thing,
Yeah.
It's contrary to our beliefs anyway.
It is.
It's part of rebuilding the muscle of death literacy and comfort and everything, isn't it? To be able to just say the words.
I actually just wanted to ask you, from your point of view, we've had a lovely conversation. What would you suggest to us, or what would you like to say to us that would help us in our passion, our campaign?
What I'll take away, from this conversation are some of those vivid, down to earth, small, kind of images and pictures of, what can be in the atmosphere of a positive dying experience. I think about another person who I was sort of with as they were passing away. I sat with my mum, and it was the one opportunity that I had actually with a dying person in my life who knew that they were dying and were conscious enough to have a conversation with them about that before they passed. Everybody else has not been. I've been able to talk to them, but I didn't know if they were hearing me. And in that moment, I found that I was really lost for words a bit as far as what I wanted to say. And my mum was next to me, and she had her turn. And I remember she thanked him for a bunch of things, and she just said, "And I wish you peace." And that was one of those things that stuck with me as well, because I'm like, oh, that's the perfect thing to say, and I didn't have those words when it was my turn, but now that I've heard those words, I'll have them again, the next time I need them. And so I think that as much as possible, through the amazing work that you're doing, and you probably already do this, I haven't had the chance to be at one of your seminars yet, I'll have to come along one day. I think as much as possible being able to give people these examples and these prompts of, these small things that can be said, these small acts, these small gestures that, I think that they're the things that actually give people that sense of being equipped to actually kind of, step in and lean in and be in the moment, rather than assuming that actually there's stuff here that they don't know, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know what to say, and someone else would do it better than them, and so they're just, so we're just going to withdraw. I think that what I really love about, what you're doing in the conversation we've had is that when you start to unpack it, you realize that this is all totally within our reach, and that we don't need to outsource it to somebody else, because it is within us, and it's just having those little stepping stones, or those things that help you kind of move towards it, I think, that can make such a difference.
Well, it's values. It's what you said, like some people value touch, other people don't. So if you know that person love touch, so please, yes, massage my feet while I'm dying. Please massage my hands while I'm dying. If I'm not in pain, massage my head. Like do those tactile things that is an act of service and an act of love. People just want something to do. Grief needs something to do. It needs a task. And in your instance, I would have said to you that I don't know what to say. And often words flow after you say those words, but I don't know what to say. I love you. I'm going to miss you. I don't know what to say. As simple as that. Something I would speak to the dying person about before they're dying, when they're being prepared, is, do you want stories read? Do you want music played? Do you want us to have the photo albums and to go through and live your life in photos and legacy that way? Do you want us to tell stories? Do you want us to act like, we do every day and have, sibling banter across, your body? Do you want quiet? Do you want peace? Do you want bird song? Do you want, that's all the things where we collect values and we know what that person's preferences are. So it doesn't get left to someone in grief to make up what happens next and what should be said.
I want to ask, just as a final question. I'm so grateful for everything that you've shared and all of your time this morning. If you were somebody listening to this conversation and thinking, yes, I need to have that conversation with a family member, it feels daunting, I don't know where to start, what would your suggestion be?
No, go, because I just do it. I've always had to do it my way, in a way. I think nowadays with people like Danni out there in the field, so to speak, that's how you start the conversation. People, in a way, it's, Danni, I know what you do, sort of, but can you point me in the right direction? Danni as navigator. I think that's a really important part of the whole thing.
And you do wheel me out to say, this is my friend Danni, and she's going to talk to you about why it's important. So it brings that little bit of, it's not Jill forcing her way in, it's like somebody in between. But I would say, everyone's been to a funeral where at the end, in our storytelling and in our love and care for the person that has died and our grief, we say, oh, I loved that part, wouldn't that be nice? I'd like that. And so it opens a space and a window for us to do that. What we do is we open those spaces every day for people. So it might be, if you can't ask a direct question, and it's always important to know how the person is doing in that moment. They may have had a terrible day at work. They may have been fired. They may have had a fight with somebody. It may be not the best time. So it's always, set the scene and find out. But then ask, like, this is my funeral song and I've got it recorded on Spotify. I've shared it with my daughter and my partner, and it's in my my wish list. What do you have, a funeral song?
Not a funeral song, but we'll talk about that later.
But that's the conversation.
It's in there.
Yeah, but that's the conversation. And Jill's is that I've recorded it. It's in my golden oldies folder. But music.
I just said what music I want.
Yeah, music is such an easy opener to start this conversation. So that's an easy way to start. And they may go, I don't want a funeral. And that's a conversation too.
Oh, there are just so many more aspects to it. I was talking with this friend yesterday who talked about her sister. She was my choir director up in Sawtell. And one of the choristers and his wife both sang in the choir. And he was in palliative care. And we gave a concert and neither of them could get there because Barry was too sick. So Sue said, would you come and sing some of the things at his bedside? So we went into Bellingen Palliative Care Unit, and we sang the whole program, an hour and a half of something, because he wasn't going to let us miss anything. And that was one of the most moving things. The whole group of us, we all went, the whole choir, we were all there. Some of the other residents in palliative care, they came too. They heard the singing and they came along as well. Then we did go and sing at his funeral, but it wasn't nearly as moving as singing around the bedside. Now, I think they're called threshold choirs. I think that's something that is completely unknown, really, and understood and not carried out. I tried to start it here. I just don't have the energy to put new things together anymore. But I still think there's a huge room for that, because it's almost normalizing palliative care too. It's nothing to do with preparing to die. It's actually enjoying, celebrating a shared passion and a shared interest.
I love that. I love that as a note to end on. Pardon the pun. That music can be the opener here, and I think you're so right. That's one of those questions that is you can imagine just throwing it out around a dinner table, can't you? What's your funeral song? Because it doesn't feel like it's actually about death. It actually feels like it's about, tell me, like, what's your favorite song, really?
There's a few ceremonies that don't have music, a music component, aren't there? I mean, I'm sure, or a piece of poetry it could be, or whatever it is, but you could easily do that as a conversation starter.
And that is a conversation. I don't want music. I don't like music. Okay, what would you like, And I want this prayer read, or I want this poem read, or I want silence. Meditation is important, and, silent meditation or transcendental meditation, that's important. I'd like a service where, we can create and co-create so many different ways to honor life. And that's what it's about. It's about honoring life and remembering. And, there's so many ways, like inviting people to a death cafe, or coordinating a death over dinner, or a will party. I know a lot of people that don't have wills. Let's get a lawyer in. Let's all put a few dollars towards it, and let's do our wills together. Have a dinner party and actually celebrate that, let's actually do stuff together that talks about what's important, and make it fun and enjoyable. There's a beautiful card game called Carked It. It's an Australian guy who designed it, and it's a beautiful way to, have some fun with the family, and ask those questions. It doesn't need to be formal. And like Jill said earlier, driving side by side or walking side by side often opens dialogue that maybe is harder when you're eyeballing face to face. And, we have something that changes when we're side by side and we're walking alongside. And you know what? That's all we do. This space is we walk people home. We walk alongside to their final resting place. It's not about telling them what to do. It's about walking beside them and meeting them where they're at, and advocating for them when they can't any longer do it for themselves.
I'm so glad there are people like you both out there doing this, and so many really great sort of tangible, accessible things that people can actually do and start playing with. And I love that idea that this can actually be fun, and we can do this in a way that actually sounds really exciting to actually think about, what an amazing end of my life could look like. And and I think that there, like, if we could bring that energy to it, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see a shift where we could kind of show up for them with that sense of excitement and curiosity, rather than, oh my god, this is going to be morbid and depressing to think and talk about. And I think that's what you both bring in spades, and we'll be sure to share with this conversation some of those resources and those places that people can turn for support. Obviously, the services that you provide being one of them. But thank you so much for talking with me. I've learned so much, from this. I'm sure others will too. And yes, we'll look forward to connecting more over time.
A great conversation, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being curious and for the passionate work you do in this space.